today we're focused on scaling a business because I'm working on a book. It's we haven't completely worked out the name of it, but it's about getting unstuck, how to scale and get the capital to do what you want to do to scale, bring out a new product, acquire other companies, syndicate with other things, go into a new region, to bring manufacturing back into the U.S. And we're going to talk about this. But how do you do that when the banks, angels, and VCs say no? The inside secrets to raising capital for growth stage companies, and a big part of that, and the reason why my guest today is so perfect for this. Jason Brill, who y'all watching live right now, you can see him there. I'm going to do his full intro in a minute, and so he's going to try to just smile and not look bored while I do this intro because we're on live, right? So it's he's Jason Brill from Parable Associates. He's going to give you, our listeners, some of his own insight secrets and lessons learned over the time. Because I have found when a business owner gets beyond that initial capital raising focus, they really get geared by driving revenue. They think that driving revenue is what their investors want. That's what everybody wants. That's how you grow, all this stuff. And they often start going on this gut feel. Like they don't actually have business plans that they maintain. And they don't really revisit their initial KPIs, their key performance indicators, when after they get, they get there, they're like, they're stuck started, then they get the money and they get going. And then it's like they're just going. They're like just and things kind of get kind of chaotic, and they feel like they're you know running on a treadmill or something, right? And they're just kind of running in place, and they really struggle to figure out how to break free and scale. So we're going to talk about beyond intuition, building systems for predictable growth. We're going to talk about how data analytics can power business expansion to grow from local to national. And in fact, the new head of the SBA, that's the Small Business Administration, just announced an initiative to help small business owners return manufacturing to the U.S. We've done, lots of tax benefit programs to bring it back in and various incentives. But one of the things that's a real challenge is not only the financing, which, I work on and bringing that together and getting helping with whatever the SBA is going to do on the equipment and the building, but with the community, whether it's national or regionally. But it's because this is like a hot topic for me. But it's really part of the challenge is the regulations, right? There's a lot of business regulations, and small businesses sometimes get buried in that, and not surprisingly, so does the healthcare industry. The healthcare industry is like really buried in regulations. So when you think about a small business owner that got into business because they'd like to do this manufacturing or they invented this thing, right? A lot of times they don't have the same. And same thing with a doctor. There really is about wanting to care for patients. They don't have a business degree, right? So they struggle with some of these fundamentals that when there's all these disparate systems and all these different kind of things that they have to keep track of. And so it's just really great timing to have somebody that can talk about that is solving those problems for customers, right? So Jason Brill helps business owners understand their data and the picture it tells, how to rewrite their story so they can grow operationally, the hidden growth metrics most business owners miss. So let me share some data with about Jason, okay? He's the creator of Parable Associates, has more than 10 years experience directly in developing business intelligence solutions in highly regulated industries. He's built a vibrant growing company that's transforming how businesses handle their crucial data. His work in healthcare technology has helped more than 1700 business uh, healthcare providers turn complex challenges into revenue opportunities, and he has proven that these strategies work just as effectively across any industry where data drives growth, which these days is really just about any industry that you can think of. So if you're a CEO, CFO, ops manager struggling with the chaos and challenges of spreadsheet analytics, if you are an angel investor that has a portfolio with those midland companies, those that have peaked there early with their initial investment and are now growing flat only as fast as their revenue they can bring in, then this is the show for you. Jason is going to share key insights and best practices on the value on the value you create when you really grasp your data and use it as a roadmap to drive tangible growth. So, welcome to the Compassionate Capitalist Show, Jason. Great to have you here today.
Thanks, Karen. Appreciate the time.
Sure thing. So let's get started by sharing with our listeners a bit of your backstory. You have been focused on driving revenue in healthcare by addressing process management, operational glitches, really revenue cycle management. But before Parable, you go back like nearly 20, over probably 20 years,
Yeah.
17 years, to data and operations and P&L in healthcare. Until about a decade ago, you were an epic project manager on revenue cycle management over at Greenville Health System, and then you went on to Alvarez and Marcel. So, is that when you had your aha moment that there was a real need to help practitioners step out of the chains of running a business and being able to do what their heart is, what they got into that business to do to begin with, which is helping patients with their health care and their life choices.
Yeah. So first of all, I appreciate the introduction, and it's easy to take a step back and not realize like the amount of impact that you have, and so mentioning the number of providers that my firm has impacted is really meaningful to me, to really start from scratch and build that reputation up over time. As far as that catalyst for me of starting a business, it was spending nearly 20 years in healthcare, primarily in finance and revenue cycle, which is the billing and collections, and understanding that the complexity it takes for a provider to get paid is almost unheard of. People on their average daily life don't really think about it, but when you swipe that insurance card or get a scan of that insurance card, that doesn't mean that the healthcare provider, the hospital, or that specialty practice, it doesn't mean they get paid right away from the insurance company. It takes about 30 days to get paid, just if it's a clean claim. And then there's also all these disputes that we call denials. So there's all these complexities, and the insurance companies essentially don't want to pay the providers if they don't have to, or if they don't agree with the procedure that was rendered. So it's really complex. And to your point, providers just want to provide care. That's their primary goal and mission. So when I was at Alvarez and Marsal, what I identified was I worked in large hospital systems pre A&M, and they had large data teams. They had large IT infrastructure and teams. But now I was working with a lot of private equity backed organizations, and they may have 20 physical brick and mortar locations for like a podiatry group, or maybe it was 100 locations for a larger orthopedic group. But they didn't have the same infrastructure available. And so that's where, by building data warehouses, business intelligence solutions, we're able to bring that data to life and ultimately help these practices grow, expand, acquire more practices, and really expand the opportunity to provide healthcare in their communities.
And I think you mentioned earlier that that was sort of your sort of realizing there was that was a real value switch. You know, the ability to get management on your data, which also led to what we call revenue cycle management, and I'm going to ask you to
Yeah,
explain that. I'm not
yeah,
going to bobble it. I'm going to let you
yeah,
explain it because you're the expert on that. And sometimes people don't. It seems common sense when you put the words together, but explaining that, but really from a private equity, because private equity firms are probably one of the majority of acquisitions come from private equity firms that then also build them to the next level, that then for a strategic acquirer, or
yeah,
ultimately to go public in some kind of roll up. So you saw that they were recognizing the inefficiencies and helping these practitioners do that. But then at that time, those practitioners aren't getting maybe what top dollar, because they do have these inefficiencies. So by figuring it out, you're helping businesses grow to a point that those owners can maximize what their exit is when they sell to a private
yeah.
equity firm.
Yeah, so you hit on a lot of points there, and probably more than you even realize with the complexity of the industry right
I
now.
do that.
So some of those, just to kind of piece it apart, I think it's good to start with. So I mentioned Rev Cycle. My firm, in my experience, expands beyond Rev Cycle, which again is the claims processing, into practice operations and even some clinical reporting and analytics. But let's just focus on the Rev Cycle part of it for now, because finance and Rev Cycle is a big part of what these PE companies are looking at. And so I'm going to use the most simplistic version of this as possible. So let's say hypothetically you have an urgent care. So you have patients that can come in and out. There's not scheduled services and so on. When you go in for that visit, let's say you get just looked at by a provider, you're going to incur a procedure code called an evaluation and management, or E&M. Don't have to memorize that. Just know that this is how they charge. You get that code, but then they do a lab test. Oh, you have these symptoms. Well, let's give you a COVID test, or let's give you a flu test. That's another procedure code, and the list goes on. You could do other scans, radiology, so on and so forth. But all those are the different codes that you would then send out to an insurance company, and those are standard codes. But here's where it gets really complex. If you come in and say, I don't have any insurance, then you may have to pay the full gross charge or the full list price. But if you're a Blue Cross patient, Blue Cross has a negotiated discount. And that discount is different than Medicare, than Medicaid, than Aetna. And so, literally, these practices are dealing with the same service being rendered, but the price is different depending on what the insurance is. And so as a business owner, it's incredibly complex to know what your gross margins are, right? So just by context or comparison to other industries, it's incredibly complex to say this lab cost me this much money to actually administer the lab and result the lab. It's this much money, and therefore my reimbursement rate for every one of these contracts that I have, these insurance companies, is different. Incredibly complex. And then to know that you're not always getting paid because somebody's going to deny payment for that. So what's happening in the industry right now, and with all the private equity part to kind of roll that in, you have these complexities and you have an owner that's often a provider group. Sometimes it's an individual who started their own practice. Sometimes they bought into the practice, and sometimes it's a group and they have, oh, we're just going to have 2, 3, 4 offices. Well, that individual, um, probably grew their practice. They right now we see a large volume of individuals that are aging out into retirement years and they want to sell the practice. And the incoming doctors and clinicians, they look at that and they say, "Oh my God, such a headache. I don't want anything to do with it. I would rather just collect my paycheck, get my incentive compensation, however that's worded, but I don't want to own this whole headache." And so these providers are now looking for to sell into private equity or be part of a roll up. What those roll-ups are looking at are, well, what are those contract rates? How quickly do you get paid on average? How can we help you as a practice? If you don't have the infrastructure in place to know those answers, to know your contract rates, to know what your margins are, to know what your DSO is, DSO being day sales outstanding, that's how fast you get paid. If you don't know these data points, you're not going to get top dollar because obviously you don't understand your business, right? Like that's the viewpoint. Put yourself in the shoe of the acquirer and say, I'm really interested in finding somebody that I know runs a tight ship and knows their numbers because I can grow and scale into that practice and provide a ton of value.
Okay, so you brought up a couple of things. I think this is important to understand key performance indicators because you
Yeah.
just said like what was it, SOL?
So
That you.
that's how a lot of people feel these days. No, it's DSO. Um, DSO, days sales outstanding. Some call it
Okay,
AR days, some call it DSO. So it's just your total receivable divided by your average daily revenue.
yeah.
It
So,
applies to any industry, but
well, yeah. We always we talk about aged reports, right? So, like when I get ready to
no.
get financing for somebody, and they're looking at like just different types of their financing, like what because that's not realized revenue, and how long is it, and that's also becomes a key performance indicator of like the collections process. And sometimes I remember when I was with IBM, it was, and we were, as sales reps, we didn't get paid if they hadn't paid, right?
Yeah.
And so we were be like talking to our ops people, and they're like, well, we'd have to call the customer, and the customer would be like, well, the invoice line is on the wrong spot, and whatever. And I guess now this can all kind of get fixed because computers talk to computers compared to as much as they did back then, but it's changed, right? Because we were talking earlier, you used to have data on disks that you had to
Yeah.
run tapes on versus now it's SaaS and things like that. So the legacy system. So I mean that the financial key performance indicators, because investors a lot of times say, what are your KPIs, and they're really talking about customer acquisition. A lot of times they're all worried about the revenue, but it's really not. Generating the revenue is different than collecting the revenue. So talk a little bit about those key performance indicators and how they may be not understanding that as a small business owner that doesn't really have doesn't those are all that's all Greek to them. They're just trying to figure out how much money they got at the end of the month, right? So
Yeah, yeah, or at least or hoping in many cases, hoping they have money at the end of the month. Um, so I had mentioned DSO, day sales outstanding. That's how fast you get paid. When you think about the healthcare industry, there's a couple things that you want to do. One is you want to get paid quickly, and the second is you want to get paid accurately. And I say accurately because again, with all those contract rates, it's not uncommon that something is processed for a different or lesser rate than a different or lesser rate than what the contract dictates.